Hello, welcome to Geekatplay Studio. This is Amy Chopin. In this tutorial, we'll be talking about Heightfield Terrains. Now, Vue has two types of terrains, Heightfield Terrains and procedural terrains. Heightfield Terrains have a fixed resolution, and procedural terrains have a resolution that's dynamic based on where the camera is. They both have their different advantages. We'll be working with the simpler one first so that we can explore the terrain editor. Now when I click on this button right here, it will create a terrain. I can make many different terrains, and each new terrain that I make is going to be different. It has a great randomizer engine. I'll just click on other ones, and you can see that you can see these terrains very well when they are not selected, when you don't see the grid pattern in them. So I'll go ahead and delete these last two terrains that I created just so I can focus on this terrain right here. Now when I right click on the terrain object, either in the world browser, right click on it here, or within the 3D views, I can go down and scroll down and select edit object. I could also double click on an object to bring up its appropriate editor. Here we have the terrain editor since we're working with the terrain, and you'll see a whole new world of buttons and panels for you to work with. And there are a lot of great ways for you to precisely control your terrain. Here we have on the left, we have several different types of terrains that you can create randomly. Now to see what they do individually, you'll want to reset this. And I'll reset it to 0. Now what I've done to tip this terrain up is I've right clicked on the terrain. And now I'm moving my mouse around to take a look at it. And you see there's no height in that terrain. We just have this one flat plane. And I can click on peak. You'll see that peak is going to give me a different effect than mountain did. Mountain is the default that happens when you create a terrain. If I reset this again, I can click on eroded, and you'll see a mountain that's a lot smoother and has some drainage water, some little creeks and rivers going down it. So each of one of these are going to give you an interesting, different type of terrain that can be very useful. Now one thing that's interesting is that, let me go ahead and create a mountain here. If you haven't reset it and instead you just click on one of them, so I'll click on peak with the mountain together, it's going to combine the two types of terrains so that now you can kind of get a look that you'd like if you want to combine those. Down here we have two other buttons. Here we have picture. If I were to click on picture, what happens with the Heightfield terrain is that you have a picture that kind of controls the altitude in it. The lighter the color is in the picture, and this is just black and white, the higher the terrain is, the altitude is, and the lower it is, the darker it is, the lower it is. And you can blend those, you can load in a picture. You don't have to have a picture that looks like a terrain. People do all sorts of different things with that, and you can mix them in different ways, blend them together, or do only the picture. So we'll go ahead and cancel that. The second button down here is our options. These are all something that takes a little bit of getting used to, something that once you're familiar with Vue, you should play around with that a little bit more. But one thing that's interesting is here you have random noise, this seed. Now the seed number that you have that pops up is generated when you click the options button. And so it will give you a new random terrain here if I were to click OK. If you do use this random seed, make a note of the number before you click OK, because it's always going to pop up a new number and you won't be able to go back to that unless you know what number it was. And on the terrains that you automatically create, you don't know what those numbers are. So I'll just click cancel on that. So that's how that left side works. Now we have our right panel. In here we have buttons for controlling our terrains, not through tweaking the randomizer or adding a picture in, but by directly affecting the terrain itself. We have a brush where we can sculpt, or we can raise this in the 2D. So if I were to click on sculpt, I can just go in, and when I have sculpt clicked on, or any of the 3D buttons, you'll notice, let me make that a little bigger so you can see it easier. This white little line that sticks out. That little line sticks out perpendicular to the surface that it is resting on. And so when I do that, let me make that a little smaller so you can see how that works. When I sculpt, it goes out in the direction that is in. And so you can make a kind of a neat overhang there. And freeform just lets you move along and pull on that and do whatever you want. Kind of a great way to make overhangs and do a lot of sculpting in your terrain. You don't have to grow out. If you look in your brush tools here, you can click on invert, and you could also make a cave here. So there you go. So there are lots of ways to sculpt that. If you click on inflate, and I'm going to disable the invert, it's just going to, instead of going straight out, it's going to kind of bubble inflate out like that. When you click on 2D and you click on that, it's always going to go directly up, which is something that you might want. You can create a nice little ridge right here, and that ridge is only going to go up. So there are lots of different ways to use these tools. And you can undo the most recent thing you did and smooth up. You have a brush where you can smooth some things out if they're too rough and you don't like how they work. Now in the 2D we also have an effect button, and this effect button has this drop down list of effects. These effects coincide with the effects in the this tab here, the effects tab, and there's lots of different ones. We have a lot of erosion effects. You might want to understand geology a little bit, but for instance, the glaciation erosion is going to erode away your terrain, simulating how a glacier would erode away the terrain, as well as the thermal, or the heat, the wind, just dissolving from water. Lots of different ways. Diffusive is just kind of a general kind of an erosion, and you can also control how fast that works by the rock hardness. If it's very hard, it's going to take a long time for that to erode, and if it's very soft, it's going to do that very quickly. And so that's just, controls how fast you can do that, so how precise you get with that. You also have some other interesting effects like grit or gravel. Lots of interesting little things in here, stones. And I can go ahead and undo the different things that I've done in here. Fir trees is a nice way, if you have mountains in the background, to get those to pop up in there without having to create plants. And if you live in an area with mountains like I do, you'll notice that from the distance you can kind of see the cones of those fir trees, and this will let you have that without the extra polygon count of extra objects. So back in the paint, I've gone over the brush mode with the sculpting and the 2D effects here. And let me go back to this altitude effect. If I click on altitude and I select a specific altitude, for instance 3, no matter what altitude, it's either going to raise or it's going to drop to go up to that. Let's do something a little easier to see. 20. So Some of it will drop and some of it will raise. You'll see how that works. If you can see that along the edge there. So that's how altitude works. If you want to put everything at a certain altitude in some places, appropriate if you're, for instance, putting a house on a terrain. Speaking of a house on a terrain, we have a nifty feature here. If I click on this button, and I don't have anything now, but if I click on this, it is going to show my terrain with all of the objects that are also within the scene. This way I can sculpt my terrain according to a plant, a house, any object that I have here in the terrain, which gives you even more precision and control. So I turn that off. I can also have highlighting, which makes some things easier for me to see. And I have this clip here that I can change. I can turn that off. It looks like we have a little plane coming up right there. Now in our brushes we have the size. You've probably already seen me use that. Change the size. The flow is going to determine how fast that effect that we have is. I have my altitude still on. If I were to, I'm going to click on sculpt and click on flow. If I were to have that flow up very high, it would give it to me very fast. If it were very low, it would take much longer to grow that. I have it at 0 almost right now. So you almost can't see. So that's just basically how that works. And our fall off is how fast the effect of your brush kind of doesn't work around the edges. And we also have a constraint to clipping range. And so if I have this on and I change that clipping range, then it will, and I move that, here's the clipping range down here, and I start working, it's only going to work within. Let's go ahead and move my flow way up, my size down. It's only going to work right here, and it's not going to go up, it's not going to work outside of it. It's only going to work inside the clipping range. And then out of that clipping range it will stop working. See, if you can see right there, it stops working. Down here we have material painting. And material painting is basically putting two different kinds of materials or texture onto your terrain. We'll be talking about terrains and materials in tutorial 6, I believe it is. And so we'll go and look at that material painting a little bit later. So once again, we went over these here. We went over our panel here. We have a few other tools up here. I've gone over the highlighter tool. Some people like to see how the sun is going to highlight on their terrain, and it's very glossy, so you can see it very easily. Our clipping range terrain, and see, now that appeared to cut off the clipping range. That's because I have my clip down here all the way down, and if I bring that up, I'll bring it back up, but still the effects are only in that area that had been in the clipping range. I can also bring the clipping range up here, and when you do this, this will actually occur when you click OK on this. Your terrain will actually appear like this with parts of it clipped off if you change that clipping range. Here's our undo, redo, our zoom in, zoom out. This increases the resolution of your terrain, which if you're having a terrain that you want more detail on is very useful. And if you're going to have a terrain close up, I highly recommend having a procedural terrain, which we'll talk about in the next tutorial. And there are just a few other buttons here that you can get back to later. This one's pretty easy. It's just an inverse, which can give you a pit instead of a mountain there if you want. So those are the different tools and the way that the terrain editor works. And once again, we have our painting, our brush way of controlling it, our way of controlling it using some random features and some of our editing tools up here, as well as the effects in this tab. And there you see everything that I've done here. I am able to see right here, and there's my camera. And there's just a lot of great ways to control your terrains in Vue, and it's one of Vue's powerful strengths, especially in the latest release. Thank you for watching this Geekatplay tutorial. If you have any questions, if you want to know more about Vue, please visit us on the web at www.geekatplay.com.